Hey, how you doing?
I've been watching China's foreign shills for several years now, so you could say that I'm somewhat of an expert in detecting exactly what makes them a shill for the Chinese Communist Party. So just in case you didn't already know, China's foreign shills are people that post videos or articles onto Western social media such as YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, etc., praising the Chinese Communist Party and pushing their propaganda. The aim of the shill is to convince you that the Chinese Communist Party is a force for good in the world and that this despotic authoritarian dictatorship is a better option than democratic countries. And spoiler alert, it isn't. And we'll get more into that later on in this video. So some of the shills live and work in China, and some of them live in other countries. For some, it's a part-time gig, and for others, it's a full-time job. Some of the shills are so obvious with their propaganda that it's laughable, but some of them are slightly more cunning and deceptive in their shilling tactics. But what they all have in common is that they're all shills for the Chinese Communist Party. And in today's video, I'm going to equip you with the tools that you'll require to easily spot one of these China shills. So let's jump straight into it with how to spot a China shill. Number 1. Ridiculous lies. This is perhaps the best way to spot a China shill because they'll just outright lie. In fact, they won't only lie, but they'll also make the most absurd statements that you'll ever hear in your life. For example, they'll say such ludicrous things as, "There are no homeless people in China." Just search for this on YouTube if you don't believe me, and you will find countless videos making this absurd claim. If you happen to be a glutton for punishment and watch one of the videos, then you're gonna be in for a serious treat. The shill presenting the video will literally walk up and down one area of one city in China, and usually they've pre-selected that area because it's the least likely place to have a homeless population, and the shill will walk up and down this street declaring, "There are no homeless people in China, see?" Meanwhile, in China, more importantly, and also the main way to identify this compromised vlogger as a China shill, is that they'll suddenly declare that the lack of homelessness that they see is all thanks to the Chinese government for eradicating poverty. And their argument may be a little bit convincing, if not for the many videos that I see every single day of homeless or poor people living in China. Unless these videos that I see in China are computer-generated images made up by the West to smear China, then I'm pretty sure that, like all other countries on this planet, China also has homeless people, right? So to walk up and down one area of a city and claim that this is a true representation of a country of 1.4 billion people is laughable at best, and it almost beggars belief that somebody could be so ridiculous as to expect all of us to believe their stupid lies. This no homeless people in China topic has been around now for several years, but it seems to be getting more and more popular with new shills wanting to prove themselves as a worthy shill for the CCP and nationalist audience. You'll see that it's usually the most desperate shills that stoop to this absurd level, and like I've said before, it's become a new shill rite of passage. Saying that there are no homeless people in China is like saying that the moon is made of cheese. It's insanity. In 2021, Xi Jinping, or as we all like to call him, Winnie the Pooh, declared that his government has eradicated poverty, declaring a complete victory. And since that day, talking about poverty and homeless people in China became a big no-no, because how could the dictator for life be wrong? But he is wrong. And I could say a million times that I am the most handsome man on this planet, but obviously that's a complete lie, isn't it? But what if you weren't allowed to challenge my bogus narrative? This is what's happened in China. The Chinese people are not allowed to discuss the problems the government has created, and they live in fear of this oppressive regime and their pathetic little dictator. And the China shills have absolutely no problem with this, and totally have no problem pushing this narrative and royally screwing over the Chinese people. Anyway, let's get on to number 2, the architects of cringe. Isn't China's infrastructure amazing? Well, the China shills love these infrastructure projects, but only if China builds them. They don't appreciate or love the old infrastructure that has been in place for decades and is still used by millions of people every single day. Nope. They only love that shiny new infrastructure that only China can build, because apparently other countries don't build those shiny new choo-choo trains and massive dildo-shaped buildings. Now, there is nothing wrong with praising China's infrastructure, despite a lot of it being built using substandard building practices and made out of materials that easily fall apart, but it is impressive. But the main problem that I have is when they start comparing China's infrastructure to other countries that have had exactly the same infrastructure for centuries. Infrastructure that has stood the test of time is apparently a lot worse than shiny new infrastructure that will probably fall apart in a few years anyway. Actually, even comparing two countries' infrastructure isn't exactly a bad thing. But it's when they start talking about how marvelous the Chinese government is for providing its people with such wonderful infrastructure, then you know for sure that you've spotted a CCP shill. How many other videos do you see on YouTube of foreign vloggers in other countries praising that country's government because they built a new railway station? And what even qualifies these shills to be making these comparisons in the first place? Are they an architect or an infrastructure connoisseur? I'll be the first to admit that a lot of China's infrastructure does look impressive, it does look great, but when that infrastructure falls apart or a problem is encountered, then you can guarantee that the Chinese government and their useful idiot shills will do their best to cover it up, because criticism of anything the Chinese government does is never allowed. Which brings me to number 3. Criticize every other country, but don't you dare criticize the CCP. I just want China and the US to cooperate in a win-win situation. China's peaceful rise is exactly what the world needs in this day and age. This is what you will hear from some of China's shills, and you might want to agree with them until you realize that they're making these statements from a perspective that will never allow any criticism of the Chinese government. And how can anyone be objective about anything with such a bias? These shills criticize almost every other government apart from China, and yes, some of that criticism is absolutely warranted, until you realize that the criticism comes from a shill hiding behind the Chinese government. The same Chinese government that heavily censors the internet, limits the Chinese people's freedom of speech, and disappears anybody that opposes them. These shills can never criticize the Chinese government, and their solution for dealing with China always seems to involve making allowances for China's awful behavior. If you can't beat them, then join them, as they say, even if joining them means giving up all of your freedom. But the shills won't tell you that. They'll tell you that China is in fact a democracy. It's just a different kind of democracy, right? China is peaceful, just a different type of peaceful, right? Even though China will quite happily fire missiles over Taiwan, and yeah, that's a peaceful government or country. That's exactly what peaceful countries do, right? Anyway, it's never ever China's fault with these shills, and out of all of the shills, they're the most deceptive, because they'll try to trick you into believing that they're acting as some kind of online ambassador for China and the rest of the world, but really they only have the best interests of the Chinese government in their minds. And why don't you test them yourself if you have the chance? Go onto one of their videos, ask them about China's cover-up of the coronavirus, the atrocities committed by China in Xinjiang or Tibet, or the lack of human rights in China, and all you're going to get from them is some deflection about, what about the US's problems? Yeah, sure. What about the US's problems? What about the problems of countries all around the world? And more importantly, what about China's problems and the Chinese government's problems? Is China always the innocent party in all situations? I don't think so. Anyway, last but not least, we have number 4, genocide or ethnocide denial. So, genocide, right? It's a touchy subject, but the shills really love to talk about genocide. If any other country commits genocide, past, present, or future, then the shills jump all over it. But if China does exactly the same thing, then the shills do their absolute best to completely whitewash it. The mere mention that maybe something nefarious is happening in Xinjiang province in western China, and the shills want absolutely nothing to do with it. The shills will try to justify China's harsh action of putting millions of Uyghurs into re-education centers because of Muslim extremists. So let me get this right. A handful of extremists can justify subjugating the entire population? The whole of Xinjiang is under mass surveillance. Mosques have been destroyed. Religious practices have been suppressed. Political indoctrination is happening. Arbitrary detention. And Uyghurs are rounded up and thrown into re-education camps. But it gets a lot worse than that, if that's even possible. One disgusting way the Chinese government has used to suppress the Uyghurs' culture is the pair up and become family program. This disgusting policy saw hundreds of thousands of party members relocate to Xinjiang and forced Uyghur families to host these civil servants in their homes. These Communist Party members forcibly moved into the homes of Uyghur families to pretty much spy on them, and if families refused, they would end up in re-education centers. Some of these government officials would even sleep in the same bed as wives of the men who had been detained in the internment camps. It's disgusting, and the shills are okay with this, as long as they can have their little 15 minutes of China fame. If any other country took such extreme measures against so-called extremism, then the shills definitely wouldn't be supporting that country's genocide, and rightly so. But why the hell do these shills always give China a free pass? The shills truly are massive hypocrites when it comes to China. Anyway, that's about all I can stomach for the shills today, and hopefully, after watching today's video, you're now equipped with the knowledge on how to recognize a CCP shill on social media. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, and there are definitely other ways of identifying a CCP shill, so if there's anything I've missed, please let me know in the comments. So anyway, thanks for watching today's video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. And as usual, these shills have been busted.
What?